Chapter 1. Adults and their peculiarities. This had better be important. Zed knew it wouldn't be, though. It never was. He plucked his way dutifully up the rungs of the swaying rope ladder. After all, he had agreed to the pact, and that was that. If either of them called a meeting, for any reason, the other was honor-bound to attend. Even if it meant putting down your book right when you were getting to the good part. Sometimes it hurt to have principles. "All right, I'm here," he grumbled, hoisting himself onto the weathered slats of the treehouse floor and extracting his official meeting notebook from his pocket. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until I hit a chapter break? I think I've figured out who the Sunset Towers bomber is, but now I'm going to have to reread that last—" "This is much more important than your silly book," his sister scoffed. "We have a real mystery on our hands. Prepare to take some serious notes. You are not going to want to miss the grade A prime evidence I've got lined up." "Not again," he groaned. "For the last time, Tuesday, we were not adopted. And even if we were, which obviously we weren't, that's not a problem. And Mom and Dad wouldn't hide it from us." Zed slumped back against the guardrail and settled in. Might as well get comfortable. This was going to take a while. It always did when she got on a roll. Tuesday flung a Pop-Tart at him like a frisbee and smirked as he caught it, mostly to prevent it from colliding with his face. "Can't argue when you're chewing," she said. "I've got it all figured out this time, really. Just listen." Zed nibbled off the corners in sullen silence while his sister launched into her prepared speech. He allowed the words to wash over his ears without fully making contact with his brain, like a stream slipping around a submerged stone. It wasn't really her fault, he thought, nodding along to Tuesday's feverish explanations. Maybe she could have made her peace with their parents' eccentricities, if it hadn't been for her name. He suspected Tuesday was secretly rather fond of her first name. Unusual, to be sure, but it had a certain quirky appeal. June was a solid traditional choice for a middle name. Tuesday June rolled off the tongue rather nicely. But making her way through life with a name like Tuesday June 1st, especially when she had been born on Saturday, March 11th, was apparently more than his sister could bear. Zed was, naturally, sworn to silence on this point. Tuesday claimed she was only 2 years old when she first realized there was anything humorous about her particular assortment of names and had devoted the entire decade that followed to keeping the middle one a secret. Zed had fared only slightly better in that department. Mostly, people assumed he'd been given an old family name, short for Zedekiah, perhaps. But no, it was just Zed. In fact, people asked so often whether it was a nickname that he developed the habit of introducing himself as just Zed. That usually fended off the more personal follow-up questions, but not the well-meaning adults gleefully informing him for the 4,000th time that his name was the letter Z in some parts of the world. People always brought it up whenever he introduced himself, as though a 10-year-old boy couldn't possibly have heard about it before, and they were treating him to a delicious new morsel of trivia he would treasure forever. Why were adults so obsessed with dissecting and analyzing names? As far as Zed was concerned, a name is just a collection of sounds you yell at someone when you want their attention. At least, his parents had not given him any middle name at all, so he didn't have to explain even more sounds to adults he met for the first time. Having eaten several revolutions around the edge of the pastry, Zed found himself left with the final jammy bite in the center. He popped it into his mouth and licked his fingers clean while his mind shifted off autopilot and turned back into his sister's ranting. The topic of today's paranoia lecture turned out to be their dog. Or more accurately, their mother's dog. Whether Tuesday was more concerned with the dog itself or their mother's obsession with it was up for debate. But Zed had to admit that, for once, his sister had identified a shred of evidence worth considering. The dog was definitely a problem. On that point, everyone agreed. Everyone, that is, except Zora Furst. Their mother had acquired Nix before Tuesday and Zed were born. Their father was fond of saying the dog had not managed to learn anything in the years that followed, but that was not strictly true. While it was true that she did not come when called or sit on command, the dog had in fact learned many tricks. Nix had learned quite early on, for example, how to help herself to the contents of the refrigerator. No one was quite sure how an animal without thumbs was capable of opening a refrigerator door, since she had never been caught in the act. But an entire ham doesn't simply get up and go for a stroll during the night, now does it? Zed imagined some people would consider it normal to take a dog along to run errands, as long as the dog could fit comfortably inside a purse, that is, or at the very least, wait patiently in the car. But Nix was neither tiny nor well-behaved and patient. She was, in fact, huge. Her bristly black fur and legs that seemed much too long for the rest of her frame made her look like a gigantic, hairy spider. His mother spent nearly every moment in the dog's company, and whenever she needed to go inside the grocery store or the post office or other locations where dogs are generally unwelcome, she brought Nix along to wait in the car for her return. Nix made use of this time by bouncing anxiously from seat to seat, smearing her nose on the windows. It must be noted that while animal rights activists would strongly advise against leaving a dog locked in a car for any length of time, Nix was never in any danger. In the first place, the car was never locked. While Zed felt that the most dangerous thing about the dog was her habit of claiming unattended sandwiches, her appearance was intimidating enough to make even the most determined burglar suddenly remember an urgent appointment anywhere but there. Secondly, and perhaps more to the point, Nix had also taught herself how to operate all the car's buttons and knobs. Whenever he and Tuesday finished errands with their mother and returned to the car, they invariably found Nix with her nose inches from a blasting air conditioner, the radio station blaring opera or polka, or pretty much any musical style other than the sort they had chosen on the ride there. Zed was fairly certain most vehicles required the engine to be turned on to run the air conditioner, but his mother dismissed this as a safety feature. Mrs. Furst simply refused to entertain the idea that Nix was anything other than the finest specimen ever produced by canine kind. This was a surprisingly easy opinion for her to maintain because Nix was always on her best behavior whenever Mrs. Furst was around. When greeting Mrs. Furst, Nix sat obediently, raising her chin to the perfect angle to produce a dignified profile while waiting for a pat on the head. She always seemed to have her back turned when Nix greeted Mr. Furst by draping her paws over his shoulders and restyling the left side of his hair with her tongue. Since Zed and Tuesday were nowhere near as tall as their father, the dog's customary greeting usually left them flat on their backs while Nix licked their faces. Despite the fact that Nix didn't know her own strength and never followed commands of any kind, Zed and Tuesday were actually quite attached to their dog. Not nearly as attached as Mrs. Furst was, of course, but the children already knew their parents' behavior was even less rational than that of most adults. What all this proved to Tuesday was not really clear from her argument. Most of her argument seemed to boil down to, our parents are weird and must therefore be up to something. All adults are weird, Zed protested. They're always losing their car keys and wake up every morning looking like zombies and can't ever call you the right name on the first try. That doesn't mean they're hiding some vast conspiracy. All right then, Tuesday snapped. Let's go ask all our relatives if Mom and Dad have always acted this sketchy. Oh, wait, we don't have any. Zed had to admit this was unusual. None of his friends' parents had balked at the My Family Tree homework sheet he'd brought home from school last year. Mr. and Mrs. Furst had flatly refused to help Zed fill his out, claiming they had no extended family. Zed had tried to point out that this was impossible. Everyone must have had some family once. But when he insisted there must be some grandparents or aunts or third cousins twice removed, his parents abruptly shut the conversation down, and he was left to bluff his way through the assignment. He already knew there were no photographs to cut up and paste to it, none that he'd ever seen anyway. But he had at least hoped for some names to put to the faces he could only imagine. Still, having been adopted was out of the question, as was having been kidnapped from a grocery store or playground as infants. This was Tuesday's next idea. Tuesday wore the dark sheen of her father's hair and the determined set of his jaw as plainly as if she'd taken them out of his closet one day and tried them on for size. Zed shared his mother's love of mystery novels and jigsaw puzzles, her long, straight nose, and the loose waves of her hair, exactly the color of maple syrup. No, Zed insisted, backing down the rope ladder of the meeting tree to return to his book. They could not possibly have been adopted or stolen. Nor could their parents be secret agents or in a witness protection program or any other of Tuesday's outrageous theories. If only Tuesday's theories had been just a bit more outrageous, they might have come closer to the truth.